All right. Hello, everyone. Ivana Taylor. I am your host for Bizapalooza Chat. Today's Monday Plugged In edition, and we are talking diversity. We're talking about writing for diverse audiences and including diversity in your writing. Well, I had lots of questions about that. There's a lot of controversy going on. There's a lot of conversation about diversity going on. It's a very hot topic. And for that, I had to go to my number one resource for all things copywriting, for all kinds of things. They're very active on Twitter. I've got Tara Clapper from Express Writers. Welcome, Tara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
I am so thrilled. I've been friends with the Express Writers people, and so when one of the things I was telling you is the community and we were chatting. There was actually Tiana Winters, who's a member of our community. She does a lot of social media. And she said, she said, Twitter chats are too safe, right? She said, Twitter chats are entirely too safe. And everybody just says like these, vapid and empty things. And we need to have a tweet chat with some meat on it. So when you came from Express Writers and started talking about copywriting and writing for diversity and for diverse audiences, I was like, whoa, that is so awesome. So Tara, before you begin, and as people start tumbling into the chat, talk a little bit about Express Writers, storytelling, copywriting, and what diversity has to do with any of that.
Absolutely. So we are Express Writers, and I'm a content development specialist there. So my role is to help clients find the copy that they need to meet their goals, which, it's more than just kind of like selling stuff. It's making sure that they get the right fit. That's the most important thing. And at Express Writers, we focus on written content. So we do like video scripts, we do blogs are kind of our bread and butter, and any kind of web copy. And every single client has a very different need, from the small business owner who might be a solopreneur even, all the way up to large volume clients who have multiple franchises. So one thing I've learned there is that, diversity means a lot of things, not just different types of people, but different types of businesses who have their own different types of clients. And that's kind of how it fits into what we do at Express Writers, and really making sure the right writer is a good fit for the audience. I think that's really key when it comes to talking about meeting the needs of your audience, whoever they are.
So it's not just diversity in terms of like culture or gender or any of this other stuff. It could be like diversity in any aspect, right?
Absolutely. And in terms of all of those aspects, including, race, gender, all the demographic stuff, you also have to think about the different affinities people have, because people are more than just, their gender, the color of their skin, their sexuality. People are also the things that they're interested in, the way that they're passionate about their business. And so you need to make sure you have a writer that can address all of those needs. And that's the advantage of working with a content agency, is if they're doing their job right, they'll connect you with a writer who can speak well to your audience.
So Tara, what is it that you saw out there? What is it that had you bring this up as a topic?
A couple different things. So like a lot of marketers, I wear multiple hats. So I do work at Express Writers, and like I said, talk to a lot of different clients. I also run my own website called The Geek Initiative, which is all about women in geek culture. And if you know anything about like comic book culture or superhero movies before they got really popular, or comic book stores, they aren't always friendly spaces for women. And so the way that I started my website, which is now kind of more of an online community, was by having a really negative experience in a comic book store and deciding like, well, there should be a place that includes everybody, that makes me feel included, that makes other marginalized people feel included. And so the website was born, and I really started paying attention to the language that people use, within geek culture to address various audiences, and definitely noticed kind of the rise and fall and the successes and failures of, small indie comic book publishers all the way up to like DC and Marvel, based on how they represent people and how they address their audiences, and really how genuine they're being when they do that.
So I've got to ask again, people are still tumbling in. So this is the perfect opportunity. Talk a little bit about what happened. What was your negative experience in the comic book store?
Well, I was 30 years old, so I'll start out saying that I was not like a child. I was a 30-year-old woman. I go into a comic book store with a friend and kind of wandered off one of my own. And I really love, my favorite comic book character is Thor. And so I was looking at some Thor stuff and doing some research because I was actually applying for a freelance job at a small comic book publisher. And I thought, great, let me go, on the ground and do some more research here. But of course, I was picking up my Thor comics because I love Thor. And, got into a conversation with the comic book store owner, and he was super intimidating. And the language that he used to address my male friend versus the language he used to address me was entirely different.
Like
and
what? You got to be specific now.
he said to me, well, if you want to know more about Thor comics, maybe you should just ask your big brother. And I was 30 years old, and I have a degree in English. Like, I know how to use the internet and do my own research, and I know how to read comics for myself. So that I was so insulted, and it was one of those things that kind of, I realized how wrong it was when he said it, and then I just felt kind of like icky afterwards and kind of processed it, and then that's what sort of galvanized me to actually do something about it, because I realized as a writer and as a creator, I can actually take control of that situation a bit and make a space where people feel welcome.
So as you and I were chatting a little bit earlier, I said I think as marketers, we've become a little bit more savvy about diversity in terms of images and things. But what you've brought up is so poignant, because I can't say that I've thought about diversity in terms of writing and language. Now, I don't know if I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I loved your personal experience. Can you think of other experiences or examples where companies or marketers need to be more careful about diversity?
Yeah, I mean, I can use some examples from within marketing, actually. There's a long history in Western culture of setting things up in a dichotomy of black versus white, and black being bad and white being good. And considering everything that's happening, especially in the US at this time, that in our cultural conscience goes well beyond, and the harm of that thinking goes well beyond, an old-fashioned story about good versus evil. So when we talk about things, even in marketing, like black hat SEO and white hat SEO, and obviously like black hat practices are outdated and bad, and white hat practices are good, we really need to think about even how those terms affect people. Now, those terms aren't going to go away, but I've seen some marketing companies get a little out of hand with like their representation about like setting it up like a war. And it's like, you can't do that a week after Ferguson. That doesn't work. You are missing a big point if that's what you've done to an American audience.
And it's what's really fascinating. I don't know if you've seen this article going around, but right now we're in the phase, I typically like to have these evergreen, but here we go, right? Right now we're in the phase of where Comey just did the whole testimony, and he talked about his experience, and when Trump asked everyone to leave the room and how uncomfortable he felt, and so on and so forth. And there's been this whole meme conversation going on, basically, where women are like, welcome to our world.
Mm-hmm.
And so because we have this conversation going on, I was like, oh my God, this is reminding me of, like, again, language. And I think on an unconscious level, I was thinking stuff, but it wasn't until I read the article and I was like, totally.
It clicks. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of people say that, to me, and I've seen it said to like a lot of other women around the election time, like, oh my gosh, is this really a thing? And it's like, welcome to the party, and I kind of feel like some of the things that I realized, towards the end of last year, I, because of my own privileges, had been similarly blind to. And it was sort of like, oh my gosh, now these things, now I get it. Like now that it's really out there. I mean, of course you should believe somebody when they say, I have this experience and it causes me pain. And the reason that I have this experience is because of how other people perceive my gender, my sexuality, my race. But when you finally see that kind of like blown out into the open, it does a couple different things, especially concerning language. It number one gives some people the impression that that's okay and that that's the new normal. And number two, for people who hadn't noticed it before but see it now, it kind of helps them wake up. Like a lot of men said like, oh, that kind of language being used towards women is unacceptable, and now it's like our everyday, and so it really further divide your audience based on the language you use too, because it's going to make people like opposed to it, or they're going to think, oh, okay, this is cool, I could just treat other people that way now. And you need to think about how you're representing your brand when you do that.
And see, I guess, and this is probably going to come up in the conversation later, but I think, when I read the article about, well, now you know how we feel, I was like, am I being too sensitive? Are we being too sensitive?
And that's why having, as a personal brand or as your professional brand and your company's brand, that's why it's really important to have your brand messaging on point and to continually listen to feedback from people, because that changes whether you're being too sensitive for the time and for the culture. Things have shifted so much in the past year and a half in the United States based upon various situations. Like people are going to be more sensitive towards topics like healthcare, no matter how they feel about it, or any politicized issue. They're going to feel strongly about it. So you need to take care in how you discuss those topics, if you even choose to approach them. At Express Writers, we cover a wide range of topics. We write whatever our clients need. And if we don't have a writer that suits what they need, we make sure to find one. We have a good stable of writers so we can choose the right person. And, we have to handle those topics with sensitivity, and we have to understand exactly how the client wants to be represented, because we do cover topics like healthcare. We do have clients who want writing about politics and, finance, and websites that are conservative and websites that are liberal, and websites that want nothing to do with politics at all and want to be totally apolitical. And so as the writer, you have to be aware of that. And as an editor, because I do jump in there and help edit and keep an eye on things sometimes. And as an editor, that's something you have to be aware of too. Every time I see that in writing, I go back and make sure that the client said, it's okay to talk about this in, a political fashion, because if they didn't, then, I need to let the writer know that we might need to rethink about talking about it in this way. If you do want to get political with your language, I say go for it. There's also kind of this point where existing is political. So, I run a website about women in geek culture. It's just that's just who I am. But it's kind of controversial to be I deserve to be treated the same way as everyone else. Some people will take issue with that. And so, especially in certain subcultures, you just have to be aware that your very existence is by nature a bit controversial. And for brands, it depends on what you're doing. Brands shake things up. Good brands innovate, and that's never a comfortable process. So you really have to evaluate the language that you use to describe those innovations that you're making. Because if you're not making people uncomfortable, then, for many brands, you're not doing your job. It's going to be a little different if you're an established financial institution, right? Then you want to make sure people are really secure and feel very comfortable with you and know that you're stable and going to be around forever. But if you're a super edgy startup and you're really trying to make moves, you're going to make some people angry. You're going to make some people uncomfortable. You're going to make traditional brands feel like they're about to be unseated by your innovation. And you kind of just have to square with that before you go with it. Because if you don't commit to believing in your brand and believing that you're going to make people uncomfortable and knowing that you have your message kind of firm, then you're not going to really like keep the loyalty of the people who are going to get on board right away. So it is a careful balance of using language carefully, but knowing when you've got to make people uncomfortable.
And, you know, I really struggle with this too. What you just brought up a wonderful point. You said earlier how we're not just talking about, you know, race or gender or any of those typical demographic issues. We're also talking about affinities and psychological issues and things that we feel comfortable with. So you just finished saying that a brand has to stand firm and have a voice and a point of view. And yet at the same time, it feels like maybe I'm wondering and maybe a little concerned about that our topic might lead people to believe that we're saying, oh no, be politically correct and vanilla whitewash everything and you want to appeal to everyone. It's almost like, maybe you can explain, how could a small business owner or a startup, or like what would you tell to your small business owner clients? How do you help them balance finding their voice, having a stand, and then how to talk to that audience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because that balance is where your brand story and knowing how to tell it comes in. And that's when I advise clients to rely very heavily on who they are. Because if you're genuine about who you are, your audience is going to be a lot more forgiving. So part of it is really evaluating the language and figuring out what works best for you and where your lines are between being super sensitive and really bold. But I think it should be guided by your brand. So if you, I'm a good example because I have one foot in this world of marketing geeky stuff and another foot in this world of working with super professional people all day, every day with Express Writers. And so I'm very careful not to cross too far and be like so stuffy professional that clients aren't going to believe I'm a good storyteller, or to be like so super radical with my language that people aren't going to relate to me or understand what I'm trying to say. So, you know, when I merged my personal and professional brand and took that risk and, you know, really had a talk with our CEO before she hired me and said like, hey, look, this is who I am. This is what's out there. I think it's going to be an asset to your company, but, you know, others might see it as a liability. She was like, no, I'm on board with that. You know, that's fine. It's kind of having that transparency with, you know, the company and the other employees, and also really knowing my story and really knowing the story of the brands I represent, because people are going to be a lot more understanding, for example, you know, about centering around female entrepreneurship when they understand that I work for a brand that has a woman as a CEO and that she started that brand with a $75 investment and did it herself. Like, that respect comes from her story. And that's kind of like the brand that I'm buying into by representing it. So being really transparent about your story, it can feel like a risk because it's vulnerable, you know, when you put your story out there. But it also gives you a little bit of leeway. And, you know, if you make a mistake, apologize and be sincere about it and change your behavior, because if your brand is long-standing, it's going to have to change because culture changes and acceptance changes. And one other thing I'd say is, you know, we have talked about gender and race and sexuality. One thing that really goes along with that is age and generations. And we talked a little bit about this before the call here. I'm between Generation X and millennials. So I understand where both generations are coming from. And my mother is a baby boomer, so I hear her perspective a lot too. And, you know, when you're marketing to millennials, a lot of people in previous generations don't realize you're marketing to people who need to be innovative and make a difference. But the generation after them, like the Gen Z people, they've always used electronic devices. It's been how they learn. It's been a part of how they learn. It's how they've grown up. Most of them don't see gender as a binary thing. They use they instead of, you know, he and she. And So to someone my mom's age, even though she's like a pretty progressive thinker, she doesn't quite get how to communicate with like Gen Z. Whereas I'm sort of in the middle of all these generations and I see where they're coming from. Like I can get it. That's not how, that's not how I grew up thinking, but I can still understand it. So when I'm marketing to that audience, I need to keep in mind the kind of language they use. And if they immediately see me referring to every single, hypothetical person in my marketing materials as he, I'm going to lose them. I'm absolutely going to lose them. And style, like AP style guide, you got to remember that style guides change as a result of usage, not the other way around. So those changes in AP style, like the use of singular they, that was made because that language shift has already occurred in our culture. So if you weren't doing that and you're marketing to millennials and younger and you weren't using the singular they before AP style guide changed it, then you're already behind. So you have to kind of like be on the pulse of those changes before they really go through. Are you still there, Ivana?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. I just kind of, I don't know, I hope my internet didn't go out.
I think I lost you for just a second, but now we're here.
Okay, good. So you were saying talk a little bit about the millennials and the use of they. Go back to that.
Right. So, like that's the language that they're using. So not only are they being like more informal in how they like to be addressed, like you want your blog posts to be really personal and genuine and expressive. They also, millennials and younger, also have more open ideas about gender and sexuality generally. And what I was saying is, like, when there's a change, like the singular they made in the AP style guide, that is a change that happens as a result of usage, not the other way around. So once that change is made, it's because it's already happening in culture. That shift is happening. So if your brand is marketing to those younger people and you haven't made the shift before those style guides have, then you're behind the times and you're behind the strategies and the language that you should be using to connect to those people. Similarly, older people, they might not have made that change. So if your brand is like, I'm going to stick to the AP style guide, and the style guide that goes with singular they, you might not want to make an abrupt shift if you're sending out, like an AARP brochure, because your audience is going to be like, what are you talking about? Or, they're going to notice that shift in a negative way. And, I'm always on the side of like using as inclusive language as possible, but you need to be really clear in communicating with your audience, no matter who they are. You wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to target a bunch of people who don't use that language with that language.
So it sounds like it's just plain old common sense.
You would think,
right?
But sometimes it's.
You would think, but and sometimes we can get caught up in things, right? Like right now, the folks over at Twitter are chatting about. I had asked the question about what's your opinion about writing copy with diversity in mind, and we had also talked about, and they're still talking about examples of content that is. What was it? Can you think of an example of content that is poorly targeted to diversity? And of course, we had to talk about the Pepsi ad versus the Heineken ad, right? So clearly both are established brands with a clear message, right? And then they kind of decided to stick their fingers in the conversation. One got booed, one got, accolades. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, they definitely both kind of like took a stand for something. I guess you can say that. The worst is if it comes off accidentally in a way that you didn't mean it. So the worst is if you're like, I'm going to make this stance, and then you like alienate a bunch of your audience, if not even worse, offend a bunch of your audience. When you take a stand as a brand on any kind of issue like that, or even if you're just like you know, like if you're a comic book company and you're like, oh, hey, half my readers now are women, I should probably market to them, right? Like, and you decide you're going to go for that market, even if it's like a purely financial decision, you know, like, I mean, Marvel's really good, getting pretty good at marketing to women. They still make some missteps, but they do that. They definitely have an intentional, you know, strategy to market towards women. And, you know, some of it's about the numbers. You know, we buy a lot of stuff, right? So even if it's just a purely financial decision, even if they don't care about whether or not they want to be progressive, they just want to make money, right? Even if it's motivated by that, they're still like, they still need to take a stand on it, and they're still going to make missteps, and they still are going to alienate some of their existing fan base. And they really have to look at it like, you know, is this financially a good decision? Is this, you know, according to like our corporate ethics where we want to go? And that's what those brands have done.
And, you know, I love what Tim Barry says on the Twitter stream. It's a response to Charles, right? Charles says every marketing message from a business should strive for basic standards of respect and equality. And then Tim says, basic standards of respect and equality. Target marketing is no excuse for bad behavior. That is such a tweetable.
That's right? So true.
No excuse for bad behavior. And I think this goes right there along with what you were saying, where brands are really struggling and fumbling. You know, they've got ad agencies, and, you know, you can get into a conversation and get into, what is it called? Like an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So you can know inside your meeting perhaps that your intentions were good. Mm-hmm. I find it hard to believe that somebody at Pepsi says, let's offend a whole bunch of people.
Right.
Buy our product. I don't think they said that. You know, and at the same time, I don't know. I think it's easy to throw stones after the fact. They could have just as easily gotten accolades. I actually thought the Heineken ad was like a little bit more, I don't know what to call it. Like, that could have gone sideways.
Yeah, and it did, and that ad got some criticism too. And I mean, I think, you know, the biggest response I have to that is it's easier to prevent a mistake and to deal with a mistake like that when you actually have the people you're trying to reach on your board. So I do panels at conventions, and I've been asked to be on some like diversity panels. And, you know, like I have some marginalizations. I'm a woman, you know, it's sometimes it's hard to fit in geek culture with that, right? But, you know, if it's like an all white panel and I'm there to talk about diversity, I'd rather say like, maybe you should ask somebody else and I'll help you out with the next one or something like that, because you need to have your experts, your editorial board, your marketing team needs to represent the people you're trying to market to. Right. And when you're creating content, the advantage of going with an agency is that, you know, if a client comes to me and says, you know, like I had somebody come to me and say they wanted like a really specific type of music, and it was electronic dance music, and I'm like, I don't know the first thing about that. I was a music minor, but, you know, I sing arias, whatever, you know. But I went in and made sure that we had a writer who was familiar with that specific kind of music, because that's going to show in the writing, especially if you're writing like an expert level of content. So it's as easy as making sure that you have your target demographic on your team. Is that perfect? Is that a solution to everything? Absolutely not. But it certainly can prevent a lot of issues.
I love what Charles says. Charles says, I am so tired of the word diversity, as if it were some standard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a shift in language concerning the term diversity, because going back to being on panels and stuff, like people now they're hyper aware of it. So they're like, okay, we need to create teams and panels with diversity in mind. So now it's like people are putting each other on these panels for the sake of diversity, not because they value opinions. And so that word has become a little tired. So I've shifted more to using the word inclusive. That's a good word. You know, and I think diversity is also broad, like we discussed before. It doesn't just refer to, what you look like in your life experiences. It refers to, diversity of brands' needs even. Like it's pretty broad. Another word that, you need to be careful with, but that does apply, is the word intersectionality, which addresses, multiple issues of what we would normally call diversity, multiple experiences. So, for example, I'm a woman and I have chronic pain issues as a result of a car accident. And so intersectionally, I have, I face challenges in society because of those two things where they cross. Does that mean my intersectional experience includes, other experiences that other women may have? No, that just means that's where my marginalizations intersect. So that's kind of like a more academic term, but it's one that can be really useful for marketers to understand, so that, you're not just marketing, if you're marketing to me, and you just have me like categorized as a white woman, that doesn't necessarily explain all of the areas in which my life may intersect. You're overlooking other areas of my life that can impact my buying decisions. Even something that isn't a marginalization, like I have a dog, right? I'm a dog owner. So that can relate to my needs as a buyer. I'm going to be buying pet food. When I think about items to purchase for my home, I think about, like, is my dog going to eat them? So that identity is more important than just one aspect of who I am. And that really ties into affinity marketing. The demographics are just one small piece of the pie.
I love what you're talking about, because I was at a conference, if you could believe, like back in 2006, and they had a demographer, and he was talking about how looking at demographics to target your marketing message could actually get you into a lot of trouble, because it doesn't make any sense. And so, for example, based on my zip code, marital status, the town that, all of these things, I should be buying certain stuff, but I don't, right? Because, like, I don't drive the car I should be driving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't buy the things I should be buying because different things are important to me.
Right, and there are a couple things going on there. Number one, big data is a thing, and social media sites like Facebook collect a lot of data about you. So there's more data available for companies to target and to analyze, and that's great for marketers, right? But on the other hand, people are more passionate about their affinities. So somebody might list the religion in their Facebook profile, but that doesn't give the full experience of what they do. Do they go, if they're Christian, do they go to church once a week? Do they go on retreats 4 times a year? Do they, travel halfway across the world to a holy site? Those things really impact how they spend money. So you don't get the full picture, even with one piece of that information. So big data is one thing, and then the other piece of it is people spend more money now on experiences than things. Back in the 80s when I grew up, it was all about, like, how much stuff you could have. What car are you driving? What things do you accumulate? And we're still kind of a materialistic culture in the US, but I think it's become more about the experiences you have. A lot of my most valuable stuff lives on the internet. My personal brand is one of the most valuable things I own, and it lives on the internet, right? It's not like a thing that's sitting on my desk. Okay, I have like mugs and comic book action figures on my desk. They're worth a couple bucks each. My personal brand is invaluable, and that lives on the internet. So experiences more than things. I spend a lot of money on developing live action role-playing games to enhance my experience as a storyteller and as a game designer, and to participate in other people's stories. And I bring that knowledge back to my job and think about storytelling in new ways and help brands, with that. But those live action role playing games, those are experiences I'm investing in. I might spend some money on a costume, but most of it's like the ticket, the travel, the experience with the other participants leading up to the game and following the game. So I'm more likely to spend time and money on anything that helps me go to that and achieve those experiences. And I'm not the only one that thinks that way. A lot of young people are like, okay, well, in this economy, I'm not going to buy a home. That's not like the end all and be all to my existence. I want to work digitally and travel the world. It's a combination of the economy and the instability of it, as well as the digital workplace, where people are just not as into stuff and they're more into experiences.
I'm writing that down. I am writing that down. I thought that was really, really outstanding. And I think let's talk a little bit about storytelling, right? Folks, before we go on to that, there's folks talking about all kinds of cool stuff. Tim Berry says, I love groundbreakers like Pond's campaign against stereotyping and disturbing female stereotypes. Well done. Yeah, and I love the, what are they called? Not Pond's, the other one. The soap people.
Oh, Dove. Yeah. Dove. Mm-hmm.
Dove. Yeah. That's another really good one. But even both, and actually that's a good example of this whole idea of storytelling, right? I think the big tip that I want folks to get out of this is that we've talked about not just the obvious, right, which is where my head was at, writing for diversity, using inclusive language. There is that, but there is the bigger opportunity of connecting with people in ways that really matter to them. And quite frankly, we can all say that inside of the things that matter to me, my gender orientation or race is like not at the top of the list.
Exactly.
I don't know, maybe that's just because of my experience, but I think when you pair that against, would you rather see content tailored to your demographics, or would you rather see content tailored to things you're interested in?
Exactly. And I think most people are interested in their experience, and that includes their experience as a fill in the blank, as a woman, using
right,
myself
that would be that intersectional thing you were talking about.
Exactly. Everything kind of like meets together to form who you are. So if you're trying to target me only based on my interest or only based on my gender, you're going to fall a little short. With all the data that's available about the stuff I like, I mean, you could Google me simply and find out a whole bunch of information about what I do for a living and what I like. And more people than not, especially younger people, are going to be like that. There's so much info for companies to take advantage. Like, please do market towards me. Like, be really specific about my experience. Be that ad on Facebook that is like, are you an Irish American named Tara, born on March 12th? Be that t-shirt, right? But just do it like a little more subtly.
Right, and there's ways, actually, they're talking about that. I happen to be Serbian, and somebody shared, one of my friends shared this t-shirt that says something about, you were looking for courage and something else, and God sent you a Serbian wife or something like that, right?
Yeah, they got really specific.
Right? So there are ways to embrace diversity and to like really speak to it in a positive way where we can just embrace that. But actually, I want to go back to the storytelling thing. So talk a little bit about why storytelling is important and how storytelling can actually help you achieve that connection.
Absolutely. So, when we're children, we learn that storytelling is a really important thing. Kids in school learn that knowing how to tell a story and have a beginning, middle, and end, whether you're talking about a made-up fantasy or what you did that day, that structure is really important to being able to communicate. But as adults, we often lose that sense of importance. We can do it kind of automatically. Someone asks you how your day was. I did this, that, and the other. What did you eat today? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? You have that beginning, middle, end. But we get attached to that like automatic formula, and we don't really think about the details. And as marketers and as business owners, we need to pay more attention to the story, because the story is what really sells the brand. No one can take your story away from you. I could foreclose, if I'm the government, I could foreclose your office, but I can't take away your business story. Nobody owns that. It's yours. So it's something that you always have. It's always a resource. It's always growing and changing. And it happens to be one of the most fascinating things about what you do as a business owner or as a marketer. And, going back to diversity, that's where that personal connection comes in. So if there's something I can connect with on a level, on any level, then I'm going to be hooked, right? If you overcame adversity and that's a true part of your brand story, more people than not can relate to that. It doesn't even matter if you're the same race or gender or whatever, right? Somebody might be talking about maybe they came from an underprivileged background, or they didn't have a lot of money, and they overcame adversity to found their own startup and do really well with it. Now, I don't come from the same background, but as a woman, I understand what it's like to face that kind of challenge in business and overcome it or find a solution. So it's general enough that I'm hooked in, but it's specific enough that it's that business owner's personal story, and it's still inspiring. And it also allows me to see, and it allows me to have more empathy for that brand and their story when I see where they're coming from. Because really, storytelling, and we say that this a lot in live action role playing and theater, storytelling creates empathy. There's a reason a lot of LARPers and actors take a minute to think about something and be a little bit more inclusive. I'm going back to a live action role playing game in 3 days. I'm really excited about it, but I play kind of a villainous character, and in real life, that's not who I am, right? But I play this character who's pretty closed-minded. She has a very set idea about traditions and how things work and how things should be, and she wants to enforce that on other people. That's something I would hopefully never do in real life, but that's the character. And through playing that character in this fictional world where I'm less likely to hurt somebody's real feelings, I can explore that safely. And then I come back not just with stories of oh, this is what my character did, but now I realize when I encounter somebody in business who may be a bit recalcitrant, I'm okay, I see where they're coming from. I get it. They're hesitant to try something new because of these experiences. And that's not something I could have necessarily experienced before on my own. But since I played through it as this character, I get it. It's different from having the experience, but it does still allow me a larger amount of empathy than I would have otherwise, right? I'm not a hater, but I played one. So now when I'm talking to somebody and they're I hate content agencies, the last one I went to ripped me off, I can appreciate where they're coming from. If 10 of their experiences with content agencies are negative, now I can appreciate why they're coming to me, why they're coming at me with this adversarial mindset when I'm there hey man, I'm just trying to help you out and get you the content you need.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is, in a lot of ways, if a business or brand embraces their story and shares their way of being, that actually can garner acceptance, right? That allows the audience to choose whether they want to connect with that or not, right? And do you feel that if you've embraced your story and you're sort of writing for that story, are you, how do I say this? Are you accomplishing that balance? Are you getting to the root? You know what I'm saying? Are you connecting with the audience? Do they kind of give you a pass, right? I don't know. That's probably not the right way to say it, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
To a degree, they're going to be more empathetic and lenient towards you, knowing where you come from. So it's a two-way.
You're like a character, right? So even as a brand, you're a character, and I think people can appreciate that. Let's say, for example, Nike stands for like physicality and pushing yourself and so on and so forth, right? To be honest with you, I'm like not quite that kind of person in my physical world. I might push myself mentally. I might push myself in any number of ways, but physical is not one of them. Right. So to be honest, I sometimes, like, if I have a Nike product, I'm like, a little bit of a poser here. But I don't hate them for supporting that.
Because you're still like, okay, that's what they're about. That's who they are. And if me or someone in my life needs some kind of like, really kick-ass like sports equipment or clothing, then I know to send them to Nike. They take a stand on what they're known for. And, I think they do a pretty good job in that their message goes more towards like general empowerment, and they realize that that's kind of a holistic thing. It's not only about what you can achieve physically. So even though I also wouldn't be like, yay, Nike, and posting all their stuff, I appreciate their message, and I wouldn't consider it adversarial. Whereas another brand might choose to be like, you only have value if you're in the gym 3 times a week. Well, I don't always go to the gym 3 times a week. So I would, as a consumer, I would be intimidated by that brand, and I consider it adversarial, versus Nike, who I feel like is like, yeah, we make clothes for you and your body type, and, we're all about what you can achieve. We know you work hard, now it's time to play hard, that kind of stuff. Like, that resonates with me, because I work hard and then I go LARP hard, and that's not always a physical thing. Sometimes it's physically intense, right? So I at least can feel that message. So that's an example of how a brand can be like a little off on messaging you, but they can still kind of hang out in the background for maybe something in your life will sort of roll around and you'll connect,
Well, I think honestly, the biggest aha moment is, I am willing to bet, and I'm going to have to ask folks on the chat if they did what I did, which is when I see the word diversity, I immediately default to demographic. And I think the big lesson of our conversation is to really look at more of the psychographic ways.
Absolutely.
That you can connect, right? So, and Nike is a brand that does that. Dove is a brand that does that. There are lots of brands that have gotten into that, and maybe, I don't know how radical of a thought this is, but like, maybe what do you think about it? I want to know, Tara. What do you think? If we, not to quote unquote ignore that conversation, not ignore it the way we would ignore, like, we don't sit there and argue about the lines that are on the roads.
I think to a degree, yes, but with certain systems and certain, I'm choosing my language really carefully here, with certain aspects of our culture, there is a power structure set up. So you need to proceed with that in mind, especially concerning whatever privileges you have yourself. So, sometimes you need to make it intentional. Okay. Right. If you're not surrounded by people every day who look and act differently than you, then when you're marketing, especially if you want to include those people in your consumer base, you need to make sure there are decision makers on your team. And that's got to be done with a very deliberate intention. And it's got to be done in a way that might make other people uncomfortable, right? If I'm at a company and this doesn't describe Express Writers, but I've been in this situation before. If I'm at a company where I'm working with other people who are all white, it takes a little bit of, a little thought beforehand to be able to approach that team and say, like, maybe we should step back and think about how we're going to advertise our stuff. You got to like take a step back and make sure that you're inclusive in practice before you can sort of take a back seat to really thinking about diversity. But again, the easiest way to do it is just make sure that your team includes diverse perspectives. And again, that doesn't just apply to demographics, but to all sorts of affinities and generations and, even customer types. If you have a bunch of recent grads who don't have a lot of money working on your team because you're underpaying them. Like, I get it, right? Business is challenging. I get it, right? But if that's who you have on your team and you're marketing things specifically towards people who drive Rolls Royces and, wear fancy watches, they're probably going to miss something that they need to connect with that audience, and vice versa. If you've got a bunch of experienced 6-figure salary executives marketing to a bunch of people who just graduated college, or maybe who don't even have a college degree, then you probably need to get some younger people on your team or some people in that income bracket on your team to be able to reach them. It's the easiest way. So many marketers are like, how do I think like a millennial? And it's like, the answer is don't, just hire one. Or like talk to your kid, like it's really that easy. Like one thing I've learned managing my own publication, and one thing I've also learned from our CEO at Express Writers, is you don't have to be an expert at everything. Like, I will never be a great graphic designer. I'll be a great writer, maybe not about every topic, but I'm a pretty good writer. I'm a good editor. I'll never be a graphic designer. So when it came time for me to have a logo, did I design the logo? No. I worked some extra hours and made some extra money, and then I hired a graphic designer to create a logo for me. It's the same thing with any kind of generation stuff, any kind of diversity stuff. Am I going to be an expert in every type of person? No, because I'm not every type of person. I'm only me. So if I need that expertise, I need to value that as part of the person I hire. I'm not saying like, oh, go out and hire a millennial just for the sake of having someone that age on your team. But, like, think about it as part of the whole package when you're making hiring decisions, or when you're trying to get work done. With digital workplaces especially, there's no excuse. You can hire somebody halfway around the world to do something. You can hire somebody of any education level to do something. There's really no reason for you not being able to find something. One of the laziest excuses I've seen in marketing recently was for a campaign that was about something targeted towards people of color, and there were no people of color in the ad. And the director of the video was like, well, I couldn't find any people in the area. And I'm like, the internet is literally like endless. You could just put a message out there and find somebody for a paying gig to fill that role. That is like the worst excuse ever.
Well, you know what? I think it's a prevalent, I hate the whole politics thing and everything, but the smartest thing you just said is whoever it is that you want to connect to, you've got to have that diverse team in place. And as much as I hate being political, it's like, how many times have you seen the image of like, all these men signing legislation that directly impacts women? I always used to say, if men had periods, they'd be federally funded.
Right.
Like, you can't know anybody's experience unless you've recruited that team, if it's not you.
Exactly. And
that audience.
The other thing is, you don't have to be an expert in everyone's experience.
Right. You can't.
A lot of people think that's what I'm like asking you to do. And it's like, no, I'm not an expert in everyone's experience. I'm just here to speak for myself. But like, there's so many things you can do to include that. And another thing is, like, even stuff that doesn't cost money, right? Like, lots of people love filling out surveys in response for a nice little coupon code or, a digital download. It's so easy and inexpensive with digital technology to reach out to your audience and get their opinion. People are probably always talking to you on Twitter or Facebook, or Instagram or Snapchat. Like, just pay attention to what they say, have a conversation with them, and you'll get more information. And look at who's responding to you. If you're trying to reach out to a certain demographic and they're not responding to you, then you need to figure out why.
Yeah.
And you need to find a way to do more outreach and to include their, opinions in what you're doing. I get people that come to me from my, through my website all the time who are like, well, how come women don't read, my comic? And it's like, well, your cover kind of looks like your comic is sexualizing women. It doesn't mean that's what is happening. But when I look at the cover versus 10 other choices I have, I'm going to completely disregard that cover because of what it implies versus all of these other comic book covers that are drawing me in for like a real story.
Mm.
So like it's as simple as asking, you know, and I don't get offended when people ask me that stuff. I love it because I can give feedback and help them improve. And that's kind of the spirit in which you need to reach out and also receive that kind of feedback.
You know, you're making me think of one of my favorite authors, and it had never occurred to me that he did such a great job of writing for diversity, but he absolutely definitely knows how to walk this balance. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. I found him on Kindle. His name is John Locke, like the philosopher, Locke, and he writes the series. He's got several like key actors, and then there are series. One is like the Donovan Creed, and one is like he's got like a Western thing. He's just got all these different ones. But when I think about the Donovan Creed series, so Donovan Creed, all right, he's kind of like a James Bondy kind of figure. He's like an assassin. He's like terribly good looking. And he even talks about this himself. He says, men want to be him and women want to be with him.
Mm-hmm.
But this character also has all these foibles and faults, right? So what's really surprising is this guy, this author, John Locke, shares who his demographic is and how he got to writing for this demographic and psychographic and so on and so forth. And he has a mixed audience, believe it or not, because of this. This Donovan Creed is both, like I said, both lovable and like guys like him, women like him. There's something about his way of being and his language that tends to appeal to both genders and across racial lines, I guess, right? And his audience is also extremely well educated, but the content is pure pablum. I mean, it is just word candy. When you want to read, but you don't want to like think about what you're reading, you read John Locke. And he says he actually writes for people who actually do a lot of reading professionally. And they just like reading, but they just don't want to think about what they're reading.
Right. Because it's better. It's also easier to like absorb things that way, especially like the high level stuff. Yeah. And you can have an intense conversation like this. And then afterwards, you know, I'm going to feel like, so can I just go like edit something really dry now?
Right. So I think that that's fascinating, right? And as to how storytelling, you know, how you can tap into the human condition, you can tap into the human desire, you can tap into things that different people think are important and yet reach a broad audience, right? Clearly he's not for everyone, right? But, you know, there you go.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, and to, you know, thinking about different levels of your audience. Like there's the broad level where your message is going to be seen by a lot of different people. And then there's the people that you're targeting. So you kind of always have to keep in mind that, you know, it's not harmful to be generally appealing to, you know, a wider segment of people. You know, especially when you're doing something like that kind of content writing, like you're creating a book, you know, what are you going for? Because some people make books to be controversial. Some people make books to be for everyone. There are a couple different books that I've read. There are two I'm thinking of. One of them is by Jen Sincero, and the other one is by Sarah Knight. And they both write about the same topics. Jen Sincero wrote How to Be a Badass, and Sarah Knight wrote like a spoof on the whole KonMari method and like.
Oh, I saw that one.
Yes, about how to
give. I have none to give.
Yes. And I read both books, and they both were targeted towards me. They're both targeted towards women, probably my age or a little younger. And they both talk about the same things. But I connected so much better with Sarah Knight's book because she was so real with her tone. And she made sure to say, like, you know, whereas Jen Sincero kind of like made a lot of assumptions about me as the consumer and as the reader. Whereas Sarah was like, look, this might not work for you. Toss it out. This might not be your life situation. Don't worry about it. It's just an example. And I connected so much more with her and with her tone that I went out when it was time to buy a second book. I went out and bought her second book and not the other one. Yeah. So it's really about being genuine and connecting. But I've also recommended that book to people outside of the demographic. Like, there is a lot that men could learn from How Not to Give an F about all these situations, which is, you know, a reference to the title of the book. So yeah, I mean, like, there's something to be said for writing for a specific audience, and you know, but still kind of like having that broader audience in mind.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think, boy, I mean, it would be hard to summarize. Let's kind of summarize with this one last thing. What are, you know, a handful of tips that you would give marketers and small business owners about, you know, what should I do after this chat? This is a lot of big, heady topics. What's on your mind for some helpful tips?
Yeah, to wrap up, some real quick tips. So first, look at your brand and kind of like assess who are you trying to reach. Then look at your team and see, are the people that I'm trying to reach on my team? And then do some research about how the people you're trying to reach actually communicate with language. And then at that step, you want to create the content, or, you know, talk to a content agency about using the right voice. Because sometimes when I get on the phone with people, sometimes they know, they're like, my primary consumer is, you know, a 50-year-old banker who's been in the industry 20 years, usually a man. I can work with that, right? Then I know what kind of writer to hook you up with. But if they're like, I don't really know, then it's hard for me as the content creator to make them something that's going to hit their audience. And then they come back to me 3 months later and say, well, our blogs didn't do very well, or no one signed up to our mailing list. Well, you didn't really give me anybody to write to, you know, or you didn't give me the right long tail keyword, because you don't know what they're looking at to find you. So, you know, definitely do your research before you just go and throw money at having content created. I'd much rather work with somebody who's done their research, or who can hire us to do some of that research, than someone who just comes in and says, like, here's my website, what should I buy? You know, like, I'm going to have a better business relationship with them long term if they're focused on really meeting their audience and speaking in the language that their audience uses, than them just throwing money at it. Like, I'd rather you spend $5,000 over the course of the year than spend $5,000 tomorrow. Like, you got to make sure your customers are taken care of.
Well, I don't think you could have said it any better than that. And there you have it. We're wrapping up another wonderful Plugged In, talking about diversity. Thanks for being here, Tara. It was wonderful having you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if anybody has any other questions, please reach out to me on Twitter. You can also reach me at tara@expresswriters.com. I'll even get back to you with a little discount code if you need to buy content. I'll get on the phone with you if you need some guidance about, like, how to talk to your audience. I do free consultations, so reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Bye.